Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video. I think you can see Holly back here in the garden behind me. This is a continuation of yesterday's garden Q&A, and these are all questions from last Sunday before last at this point's garden Q&A video. Questions that I got on yesterday's and questions that I get on today's. I'll answer this coming Sunday, and then these will just be on Sunday where they belong. I just got behind this past week, and I've been sick for about a week, so these are easy for me to do during that time, as opposed to putting all the things in the ground, which definitely need to get started on some pretty big projects back here. But in the next few days, I'll probably shoot some sort of tour video out here tomorrow, because the garden has just completely come to life. I've got all kinds of things flowering that weren't flowering a week and a half ago when I showed off the garden. I think you can probably see that it's really starting to wake up very quickly back here behind me, and lots more to come in that regard. So let's jump right into some questions. Somebody has some wax myrtles in South Carolina, and they're super thin. Wanted to know if they could cut them all the way to the ground. That might not be my first strategy if they haven't been in the ground for very long. I might just try to maybe take them in half or maybe a third and see where that lands with new growth, see where the new growth comes out from. But typically, I don't like to jump right to pruning something to the ground if it's under a lot of stress. Old established plants that I'm resetting, and I don't care, it wouldn't bother me whether they went ahead and died because they're just overgrown anyway. Those are the kinds of candidates that I'll cut completely back to the ground. But something I would prefer, if it leafs back out, fills back in, I'm probably just going to start with maybe taking a third of it back. And, again, that should force some growth down in the bottom of it and down in the middle of it. You may have to hold them back two times in a row to do that. I've got an osmanthus over here that's finally starting to fill in. I've pruned it. I'm basically just holding it at the same height. It keeps trying to grow a couple feet. I hold it at the same height, just trying to wait for more and more interior growth to kind of catch up with it. So that's my strategy on something like that. I talked about that Fats Hedra. Somebody asked me if it's newer, and I talked about, no, it's been around for a long time. One other thing I just kind of didn't think to say on Fats Hedra is that that plant's only ever been done one time. Every Fats Hedra in the world is a cutting or a variegated sport of that original cross between Fatsia and Hedra helix. Fatsia japonica and Hedra helix. Literally has only been done once in history. It was in the early 1900s. So it's super interesting. That plant, every single Fats Hedra is from an original cross between those two parents in a completely separate genus, which is super, super interesting. Okay, so somebody asked what time of day to move a Mystic Spire Salvia. They're way down in zone 9. Theirs is blooming already. Just don't want to get stung by a bee. Probably super early morning is the time to go out and to do that. And you can always, I think that if you're moving any perennial that's in full flower, you might want to consider taking the flowers back a bit anyway. So it might be that you go out there super early in the morning and cut it back maybe a third before you move it. It's probably best for the plant, to cut it back some anyway. And that Mystic Spire Salvia should be dividable, so you should be able to leave some where it's sitting now and take some with you to another place. You'll get several out of it in all likelihood in the process of moving it. So somebody asked about, from Denny, going over to Denny Werner's house, who's in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's the plant breeder for sterile cultivars of butterfly bushes, which has been kind of a game changer with butterfly bushes. Because they are invasive in some places on Earth, very invasive where they are invasive. And these, like Weeping Golden Falls Redbud, Flamethrower Redbud, lots of plants that Denny's bred, and he's been on the channel a couple times in the past. He's one of the nicest, just absolute nicest, generous people. Just love being around Denny. They were asking about the maintenance on his perennial border. So if you haven't seen the video on Denny Werner's perennial border, it's just it's unbelievable. It's the most, I'm sure even right now, you know, right here in early March. It's taken off. They were just asking about maintenance. There's not a tremendous amount of maintenance in that perennial border because all those perennials were smashed in there really close together, and they've been allowed to fight it out. And so there are weeds in that perennial border, but boy, they have a lot of competition amongst all the native perennials that are through that perennial border. So, and he, you know, that thing gets cut to the ground, you know, like now-ish, you know, as other things are coming up. And there's a couple weeds here or there that you could see in there, but not a whole lot. So planting thick, you know, in that border has allowed, you know, for far less maintenance. Doesn't need to be mulched. It doesn't need to be. I think he puts down a new compost layer, like leaf mold, in there as things are emerging, but I think that's about it. Very little maintenance there. He's got other areas in the garden where the things aren't planted quite as densely that I'm sure he's getting weed pressure, but not in that perennial border. Very little. It'd be a miserable place for a weed because it's also shady. All those perennials come out of the ground and grow so quickly in the spring. They shade the ground pretty quick. Let's see. So again, you know, just in terms of waiting for things to come back, somebody says they have salvia that's not coming back. Some of the salvias are going to be, some are incredibly cold tolerant, like Salvia nemorosa out at the street's already budded up and ready to bloom here in zone 7B. My salvias that are more like Mystic Spires, the ones that are zone 7B, 8, 9 salvias that I have in this garden, some have popped up, some haven't. Don't know where I'm gonna land, if all of them are alive or not. But I'm not giving up on anything. There's been even a couple hosta here that I thought are kind of slow to come back. And then others that are way up already. But I've found them in the last couple days. And so I'm still have things popping out of the ground here. So I'm not gonna panic on anything being gone yet. And you know, if it is, maybe that's an opportunity to find something interesting to replace them with. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked just in general about my go-to nurseries in Raleigh. We're lucky to have a lot of great garden centers, you know, around the city and around, you know, the whole triangle. You know, I was up at Homewood doing, you know, video 2 weeks ago at Garden Center and Nursery. They do a lot of their own growing on some annuals. Logan's is very close to me, near downtown Raleigh, at an old rail station. So, you know, regardless of what you're looking for, it's just kind of a cool place to go because it's literally at an old rail station. Unfortunately, they're moving. And then Fairview, there's a lot. I mean, again, we have a lot of great garden centers. Then we have some nurseries that are open. So Garden Treasures is open on some weekends. I've been out there and interviewed Pat McCracken. Pat McCracken is who introduced Sunshine Ligustrum and a few other plants that are out here in the landscape, that touch of gold holly. And so, you know, Pat's got his place open a few weekends during the spring. That's Garden Treasures. Adcock's Nursery, I've shown on the channel, you know, is open and grows bigger container material. My friends at C&J Nursery down in Benson, make sure you tell Camillo I said hello if you go down to C&J. He sells directly to the public. So there's lots more. So we're kind of lucky here because North Carolina State University is right here, and a lot of these folks are graduates from NC State's horticulture program, and they just kind of went out and found, you know, the closest land that was affordable to justify farming on. A lot of those places are no longer affordable, but they were at one time, and you could justify farming on them. And so lucky for us here in this area, we have just a wide range of, you know, growers that'll sell to you, you know, garden centers that are very much on the you know, upper end and just have, you know, just incredible selections. And then, you know, a couple places where we can also get very large material as well. So feel kind of fortunate in that regard. Let's see, you know, I like to explore them all. And of course, then Plant Delights opens theirs, you know, a couple weekends a year. And that Juniper Level Botanic Garden is one of the best botanic gardens you'll ever see in your life if you get a chance to see it. And so, you know, it's worth a go there, whether you're buying plants or not. You know, it'll be back open a couple weekends in April probably. I don't know what their schedule is. Okay, so somebody has a forest pansy red bud that turns green every summer. Mine did that as well, and I don't know, they didn't say where they were. So the further south you are, probably the more greening you're gonna have in your purple foliage red buds. And the more north you are, probably the more it's gonna hold it through the summer. But everywhere, they're not going to be as bright during mid to late summer as they were when they first leafed out. So, you know, that's just kind of normal with, there's a lot of purple foliage plants that will do that. It's green in the middle of the leaf and purple on the outside, and it just kind of wears thin, and the green starts to show through during the summertime. The more sun that forest pansy's in, probably the more, there's a delicate balance there where in too much shade, those are way too thin, and in too much sun, they definitely do a lot of greening, and there's a sweet spot in the middle there. Let's see, so somebody bought a camellia in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had said that they need 4 to 6 hours of sun. You know, I think that would be, if I've said that at all, it's probably more on Encore azaleas. My Camellias, if you bought a Camellia sasanqua, Camellia sasanquas are more sun tolerant than Camellia japonicas. And they probably, you know, they all need good bright light in order to flower. I think in Phoenix, almost every temperate Japanese or Asian plants, almost anything listed in that 7 to 9 range, which there's a lot of plants. You'll see a lot of plants on my channel. 7 to 9, 7 to 9, 7 to 9. These are a lot of Southeast Asian non-invasive plants, but they probably will require shade in the Phoenix area. Just you know, the sun is going to play a little differently. Play a little differently there. So you know, you could try it in a container for a season if you wanted to in a spot and see, you know, how it performs, you know, in that spot before you sink it in the ground. But I would treat most plants, you know, in West Texas and Phoenix that you're trying to, you know, if you're in zone 9 and it's a zone 9, you know, temperate plant. And, you know, those are plants that see winters, you know, where they're from. You know, they're used to temperature change, but not radical temperature change. You know, my guess is it's going to need more shade than not there. Somebody's got some Bruno in zone 6B and planted them in October, and haven't seen them come back yet. My Bruno in the front garden is already blooming. I would expect that you would have seen, you know, a good amount of growth even in 6B at this point. Maybe not. Maybe there's still time for them. You know, I've talked frequently about planting, you know, even cold hardy perennials that go to sleep in October. I almost, if I'm buying something in October, November, I'm almost keeping it in a container through the winter. These things that go to sleep and come back, because they're vulnerable to rotting, because you're digging a new hole in October, and that hole is going to get wet, and it's going to potentially stay pretty wet through the winter time, and just put the plant in, you know, very wet, you know, with wet feet through the whole winter. Probably not cold related damage, because they're very, very cold hardy. But if they don't come back, that's my guess is probably what happened on them, is they may have drowned during the winter time. So somebody's got Mexican heather coming back in coastal North Carolina. Wanted to know whether it was a good pollinator plant. Yeah. Mexican heather is not an actual heather; it's actually a kufia, and we will have. I don't know if I have any kufia yet. We've done a few from seed, and we will purchase a couple kufia as well. I think I had 5 varieties of kufia out here last year that, you know, I love that entire genus because the hummingbirds absolutely love them. Cigar plant is one of the, is a kufia. Hummingbirds absolutely love them. I mean, almost all pollinators just love all the kufias, and including Mexican heather. And they're hard. I mean, for Mexican heather, people in like zone 4, 5, 6 are going to use it as an annual. Folks in zone 7 and 8, it has the potential to perennialize, go to sleep and come back. And then in zone 9 and 10, you know, it'll be an evergreen plant. Probably gets a little seedy for some folks in the deep south, but it doesn't up here in North Carolina typically. Let's see. Somebody moved from Colorado. I'm guessing they're saying they moved here to North Carolina, and Don't see a whole lot of roses. Do roses do well? I mean, pretty much everybody watching this video can grow some sort of rose, and most roses. The one rose I have in this garden that, what is it called? I'll put it on the screen because I can't remember the name of it right this minute. I think that thing's hardy in zone 4 to 10. So roses are hardy for most folks. The more you get into the southeast, the more likely you are to deal with some conditions related to our humidity. So, you know, more leaf spot problems, more issues. It just in general, you know, no more insect issues than anybody else, but certainly more potential disease issues. And so you may see a few less than you would other places, but there are lots of disease resistant roses available now. It's a breeze red. That's the name of that rose, and it blooms like crazy. It's incredibly clean foliage on that plant, and it's hardy in zone 4 to 10, which is true with a lot of roses. So I get lots of sooty mold questions, you know, on crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtles are susceptible to aphids, and the aphid secretion gets a mold on it. It turns black, and it's called sooty mold. Frequently under crepe myrtles, everything that's under them will turn into just kind of a black mess. And I mean, all the questions I ever get related to it, people are spraying neem oil at all different kinds of the year, at all different times of day, and all different kinds of everything. It's the aphids that are the issue. So spraying the mold that's on the secretion really won't do you any good. You want to spray the aphids, and if you're using neem oil, you know, crepe myrtles are great pollinator plants, and so especially Natchez. Natchez seems to always have the most bees on it of any of the varieties. So if you're using neem oil, make sure you're using it super early in the morning. Look up how to do it when you're using a product, you know, around bees. But you know, that's, if you have it, you're just going to continue to have it. The crepe myrtle's probably not in a position where it's getting good air movement. You're potentially over pruning it, so it just doesn't have any kind of ability to get light or air down into the interior of the plant, which is true with a lot of crepe myrtles. It's not getting enough direct sun. It's under some sort of stress. You know, typically ones out in more open space are less likely to end up with aphids than ones, you know, tucked up against the house on a corner foundation planting. So, you know, keep that in mind. Let's see. Somebody has a PJM Rhododendron. These are very cold hardy rhododendrons, like folks in zone, I think they're zone 5 hardy, which there are not a lot of leafy evergreen things that are. It's waking up slow every year. It's not blooming, or it's blooming very little. Wanted to know whether they should give up on it. I don't ever, for me, I don't give up on plants. I move them about the garden. And so sometimes I'll assume if something is growing really slow in comparison to everything else in the garden, that it got planted too deep, that it's just not liking the space that it's in. And when I say it got planted too deep, it may not have been you, it may have been at the nursery. Sometimes they'll buy a 1-gallon plant in, pot it into a 3-gallon container, and then root it out and send it out to the nursery, and it got planted this much too deep in that transfer. So it could have happened without you knowing it ever happened. So a lot of times I'll replant something very quickly. I mean, that's, you know, and even if it's been there 3 years, if it hasn't grown a whole lot, it probably doesn't have a very extensive root system. It'll probably be very easy to move to a new spot. The sun is getting brighter and brighter here this morning. Somebody asked about getting the roots to break down quicker on a maple that they had removed or that they removed. I have the same problem out in the front garden. We took down that diseased, that maple that needed to go in the front garden. And of course, I'm still now gardening around the roots. Keep in mind, root material, you know, things that grew under the ground was meant to not break down quickly, you know, to not have water be an issue, to not have, you know, things be able to attack it. So that wood is, you know, made out of different stuff, basically. But now that they're dead, you know, they will break down. But keeping the ground covered, you know, that's always the answer, you know, to almost, you know, to a tremendous amount of questions that you get. Keep the ground covered, and all of the beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria, will go to work on it. But it can take years, for roots to break down under the ground, because they're, they don't have as much light or air, to break down under there. And so, and the wood was literally designed, to not break down under there. So it will take a while, but make sure you're keeping the ground covered, because that is the secret to, to having a properly functioning system of things being broken down properly and made available as food for your other plants. So somebody has tater tot arborvitae that are brown on the outside, wanted to know if they should just go ahead and prune them back. You could if you wanted to, but probably it's going to be fairly self-repairing. All of this outside burn damage that you have will be quickly covered up by new growth. That's true with most things that get toasted from late frost. I mentioned that last week. Probably not a lot of reason to go out and worry about little, tip pruning things that the new growth is going to come out really, really quickly around them. But damage on the outside of your conifers was some sort of wind damage. Maybe the pot, maybe the container they were in was frozen, and it had a wind across the top of it, and it couldn't bring up any water. And so that's why you got the burning on the outside of it. More typically, you'll see in the interior of conifers during the winter time that they'll brown, because they just shed. They just shed some of their old foliage to put on new around the outside. But it's up to you whether you neaten them up or not. It's probably it's going to take care of itself pretty quickly. So somebody had 26 degrees down in Louisiana. They already had fruit set from flowers already, and then they've got a lot of burn on their crepe myrtles and shrubs. Most of your shrubs and crepe myrtles and things will be fine, unless it was something that was super early flowering shrub. You may have lost some flowers on them. Your fruit is really, you'll know when you know. Amazingly, all of my blueberries had already flowered before we had that 28, and all the blueberry and the fruit had set, and so it looks like all my fruit survived. I actually missed the window of open flower. If the 28 had coincided with the flowers being open, I think I would have gotten more damage than I did. So it was weird that they were so far ahead. It was actually beneficial to them ultimately. So 26 is pretty tough on fruit flowers, though, for sure. That is a definite temperature that farmers don't want to see when they have open flowers on their fruit. Let's see. So somebody has raised beds. They want to fill in the bottom as cheaply as possible and not have to fill it in with very expensive soil all the way to the top. What should they put in the bottom? They didn't want to put in straw because that was going to settle over time, and they would have to put more soil in. And then they were asking about putting topsoil or something like that at the bottom. I don't know. Again, I've talked about this several times. I don't know what the quality of the topsoil you're going to get is. You could be introducing disease issues into your raised beds, potentially. I mean, if it was farm soil and it came from a farm that had, whatever issues, we don't know. We don't know where that soil came from at all. So I think that you really need to be adding additional organic material in the future anyway. So I like using logs and straw and things that will break down some and settle, because keep in mind, the potting soil materials that you're using in raised beds, typically, it doesn't have all the nutrients that native soil has, so that the sand and clay particles that are in your soil, they have a lot of the nutrients that your plants need. When you do container plants and raised beds and things, and we use all this beautiful compost and all this material that's supposed to be the best thing for our plants, it does run out of nutrients. Whereas soil just doesn't, because it's literally, it's rock dust. It's material from mountains and other things that have been broken down over time, and it's got the things that your plants need in it. So you need to be adding additional material anyway. So the fact that those logs and leaves and straw and those things are going to break down a little bit each year and leave a little bit of gap up at the top is a good thing. You're going to you know, ultimately a good thing anyway. So that's the way I would go about doing that. Somebody asked just simply how to support the living soil, and then somebody answered them, keep it covered. Yes, that's the answer. As simple a sounding answer as that is truly the answer. So whether that's wood chips, pine straw, you know, wheat straw, you know, anything you'd ever want to use as mulch, pine bark, it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you're keeping that soil covered and keeping some moisture in the soil, not wet, but you know, some moisture in the soil. Those things underneath will thank you, and they'll take great care of your plants in return for that. And then somebody asked about pruning carex. They specifically talked about feather falls, just looking rough coming out of the winter. Carex for us in the south, most of the carex you'll see is zone 5 to 9, something like that. Up in zone 5, they typically just kind of get a little ratty and need to be cut back. They almost cut themselves back. By the time you get into like zone 6B, 7, 8, 9, it's always a decision on whether or not you're going to cut your carex back. If they look kind of ratty coming out of winter, you can cut them. Keep in mind, at this point, it's almost too late. My Everillo carex over here are really up. They were behind me at the beginning of the video there, the bright yellow. Those are so far along now, I'd hate to be cutting them back at this point. So I might leave them at this point if they've already got lots of new growth coming out on them. If you're going to prune them in the future, you want to do it before that new growth starts to come up on them. So last thing before I wrap this up, I had somebody say they were unsubscribing on the video from yesterday, unsubscribing because they thought I was mocking people or something, and I would not in a million years be mocking anyone's accents or anything like that. I've never heard anyone's accents on this channel. I typically do versions of my own funny Southern accent when I do when I do an accent. And I guess they also said that I was acting like people's questions were dumb, and I've said 100 times on the 1,400 or so videos on this channel that there are literally no dumb questions ever. Everyone has to start, and so you know, they may have missed me saying that at some point along the way, but that's the truth. There are no bad questions, there are no dumb questions, and everybody has to start somewhere. So if you have a question about gardening, ask it down below, and I'll do my best to answer and, you know, pick from those each week. And I'll be back Sunday with a garden Q&A. Thanks for watching.